Galveston County. I'm going to read a short statement, after which Nancy Guerra will also repeat that statement in Spanish, and then we'll open up for questions. So, the Galveston County Health District today confirmed the first Galveston County death associated with e-cigarette smoking or vaping, which is also known as EVALI. The patient was a female, age ranging from 30 to 35, who passed away on the 29th of December after a long illness at a local hospital. She was a Galveston resident. For confidentiality purposes, we're not going to be giving you any more details about this particular patient. We're very sad to report this death. I think it's very sobering that we're still seeing deaths from vaping illness. This is the second death in the state of Texas. And there have been over 270 cases thus far that have occurred in Texas. We don't have the final number. There's a new number for the total coming out sometime today. It's a very serious public health threat, and we would encourage people to avoid vaping products if at all possible. And it's just not a good time to be vaping in the United States today, because these products can be dangerous. And we would just warn people to, if they can stop doing it, and watch their kids and make sure their kids aren't doing it, because this is not without risk. So I'll turn it over to Nancy, and then we'll be open for questions.
Good afternoon. My name is Nancy Guerra with the Galveston County Health District. Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Nancy Guerra con el Condado de Galveston. El Distrito de Salud del Condado de Galveston hoy confirma la primera muerte del Condado de Galveston asociado con el cigarro eléctrico, cigarro de vapor, asociado con el daño del pulmón, también conocido como EVALI por sus siglas en inglés. La paciente era una mujer entre la edad de 30 a 35 años. Falleció el 29 de diciembre de 2019 en un hospital local mientras que estaba siendo tratada por EVALI. Ella era una residente del Condado de Galveston. Por razones de privacidad, no vamos a revelar información adicional identificando a la paciente. Estamos tristes a reportar este fallecimiento. Esta es una seria amenaza para la salud pública. Estamos empezando a ver que esta es una amenaza con la vida hasta para las personas que se encuentran saludables. Daño severo a los pulmones es posible hasta con el breve uso de estos productos. Desde el 3 de enero, el Distrito de Salud ha recibido otros 4 casos confirmados o probables de pacientes hospitalizados con EVALI. Todos son residentes del Condado de Galveston.
Okay. Any questions? Yes.
Yeah, Dr. Kaiser, can you tell us, was this a tobacco-based or THC-based vaping involved?
We believe that there was THC vaping involved in this particular case.
Do you know how frequently she was vaping before she was
Don't really have a lot of information on that, just that there was vaping going on before.
But did she admit that it was THC, or?
Well, we have a secondhand report, so I really shouldn't be commenting any more than that.
Do you have a brand on the type of device that was being used?
No, we don't have a brand on the type of device that was being used, although I would point out that based on data that was just released by CDC and FDA, there's been a ban. Well, there's a ban that will take place at the end of the month on all flavored types of vaping devices. And the real issue here seems to be not so much the THC, but the carrier that gets THC solubilized, which is vitamin E. So there's a vitamin E solubilizer that takes these fat-soluble substances, whether it be THC, whether it be other types of fat-soluble flavors, and that is actually what seems to be attacking the lungs and causing the damage.
What does it actually do to the lung?
So what happens is that it gets into the lung by, so basically they create this molecule. It's a little bit of vitamin E and a little bit of an acetate. And the acetate makes it water soluble. So then it gets into the lung. It's able to cross the lung membrane. And when it crosses the lung membrane, it gets in between that space between where we breathe and where the blood then transfers. When that happens, you basically get fat deposited along there. And because this is basically a lipid, and then there is a reaction to that, and then the types of cells come in called eosinophils come in and cause a great deal of inflammation. And it's primarily an inflammatory disease in response to the soluble carrier that's going inside of the lung.
What does that look like
Yeah, so what, yes, yes. So the CDC has now come up with a well-defined definition of vaping illness. And basically what it is, it's someone who has been vaping, who has chest x-ray findings that look like pneumonia, who has no other reason to have a pneumonia, or even if they do have an infection, the infection doesn't explain the severity of their disease. That's the case definition. And so this particular patient, as well as the other cases that have been reported by CDC, all meet that case definition.
Can you tell us anything more about the other Galveston County cases, how severe they were? Or...
Yeah, so none of the other 4 died. Several of them had stays in the hospital. I think one of them was in the ICU for a short period of time. All of them went home and recovered.
Were they ages across the board, teens?
Yeah, surprisingly, the ages are across the board. The most recent data coming out from CDC suggests that actually older people are more likely to have bad reactions. So people with heart disease, people with diabetes, people with lung disease already are more likely to actually suffer severe consequences. But there certainly have been kids who have gotten very sick.
And these other 4 patients, were those also THC related?
Not consistently. And this has been one of the problems with the whole trying to evaluate this illness. It seemed like initially that they were THC related, but only about 50% of the cases nationwide are THC related. And we're seeing something similar as well. And so it seems to be that it's not so much the THC as it is what you need to put into the solution to make the THC soluble so that you can smoke it through a vaping device. But if you were to use something else like some sort of flavor, some juicy fruit, whatever, it requires that same type of thing. So it seems to be a combination of 3 things. It seems to be a combination of 1, having the vitamin E in there, 2, an excessive amount of smoking, but 3, also the individual's response to it, because there have been cases of individuals who have minor, just not a great deal of exposure, who have had very severe cases. So there's an individual host factor as well.
Can you fully recover from this?
Well, that's a good question. We're still very early on in this. So the case definition first came out only about 6 months ago. As far as we don't know what the long-term effects are going to be at this point. And I can tell you, people are going to be watching these young people who have developed this illness for a very long time to see what happens.
It almost seems like it's even worse than, not that smoking is not bad for you, but it's like from the time you start, it can almost happen right away compared to smoking sometimes has longer-term effects.
That's
but
correct.
This can just attack you right away.
That's correct. And it's very interesting because vaping was initially marketed as an alternative to smoking, right? And I personally have actually had patients who have gotten off cigarettes by vaping. And in Great Britain, they view this as a bridge to getting off of cigarettes, except in the United States, the market's has been unregulated. And so all sorts of things happened. And I think that what we've seen is that when people are putting all sorts of things into these products, we don't know what's going to happen to it. Right now, the general consensus is that if you're a long-term smoker who's been vaping to get off cigarettes, that's probably okay as long as you stay away from flavored products and only stick with the cigarette substitutes.
Does the health district have any, are you trying to track if these people use products that might have caused their illness? Are you trying to track where those products came from locally? Is that the health district's role at all?
No, we haven't done that. So let me tell you about the role in following this. So this was a CDC initiated tracking project. And what we have done is we ask physicians to report cases to us. Right now, there is no state law or federal law requiring reporting of these cases. And so we were able to obtain the cooperation of doctors throughout the county to report these cases to us voluntarily. We then pass those potential cases onto the state. The state actually does the investigation for the CDC and then passes those on to CDC. With regard to specific products, there really is no tracking system currently in place right now anywhere in the United States as far as I'm aware of.
What's the course of treatment for someone who's showing symptoms but maybe
Yeah.
not be acute like this woman
Yeah, so, right, so basically the first thing is keep them breathing, and there are some patients who have had to been on the ventilator. The second thing is that to treat them with steroids. Now, steroids blunt the immune response and have been associated with people getting better. It's hard to say whether taking the steroids actually makes a big difference at this point because it's still too early in the illness. However, there have been patients who have gone home, who have stopped their steroids, stopped the drugs that blunt the immune system, who then end up back in the hospital, and there have been a significant number of deaths among those people. So for patients who have a steroid or have the vaping-related lung illness and then are placed on steroids, we would encourage them, when you leave the hospital, make sure you continue taking them and wean them off like your doctor said. Don't say, oh, I'm better now and I'll stop, because those are the people that have come back and gotten really sick.
For the woman that passed away, was it too advanced for the steroids to be effective at that point?
That's a good question. She was actually presented with very severe lung disease and had a very, very long course in the hospital. So it was
How long was she in the hospital?
several months, I believe. Long time.
Can you tell us anything about how long she had been vaping and perhaps, without getting too graphic, I mean, what kind of shape was she in?
I can't answer that question. I don't know.
Will there be an autopsy?
I don't know the answer to that. There's none required at this point.
If you had a desperate parent who had a kid or teenager, someone even older than that, and they were deciding whether to vape or not to vape, with THC or not THC, you had a chance to sit down and talk with them, what would you tell the parent and the kid?
I'd tell the parent, don't vape, don't let your kid vape, and I'd tell the kid, don't vape, this is bad for you. It's really dangerous, and people die from this. And I think that's the real message that we have to get through. This was something that just was recognized about 6 months ago, and look at the number of deaths we've had and how rapidly it occurs. And so it's not something like, I'm going to have a drink of alcohol. It's not even something like I'm going to take a drag of a cigarette. It's not even something like I'm going to smoke a little marijuana. This is much, much more dangerous in the short term than any one of those things.
You talked about regulations a little earlier.
Right.
Talk a little bit about that. What's on the foreground?
So basically what the FDA has done is the FDA obtained jurisdiction over e-cigarettes in 2016. They've been talking about having a lot of regulations about it, but hadn't done anything. And on December 26th, they issued their first set of regulations. And so basically, they're, with all cartridges, which are things like Juul and other products as well, it will be illegal to sell them in the United States except for nicotine-flavored and menthol-flavored. And the reason why is neither of those two require any type of carrier which has been associated with the lung disease. Those are the only two that will be allowed. They have not issued any regulation on the more old-fashioned way of vaping, which is to have a pipe that you fill yourself. I think part of the rationale behind them doing that was that it's the cartridge products which have really spread very, very rapidly. It's the cartridge products which are widely used by teenagers, and it's the flavored products that are widely used by teenagers. So by making those illegal, it now will make it much harder to get those types of products. I think they're still struggling with the issue of vaping as a bridge from smoking, so they don't want to ban the products outright, and they want to leave some available. And in fact, both in the FDA and CDC's latest guidance to physicians, they say, if you have patients that are vaping to stop smoking, don't tell them to stop vaping as long as they're using products that aren't dangerous.
With all the colors and flavors and all the cosmetic type,
Yeah.
they gotta go.
They got to go. They got to go by the end of the month.
So it's the flavor that requires the vitamin E, not necessarily the THC or anything else?
Well, THC also requires vitamin E, but there have been other types of carriers that people have used. The CDC and FDA actually did quite a large study where they looked at all sorts of different solubilizers like peanut oil and different types of oils, and it was the vitamin E acetate that was in about 51 of 54 samples that they got directly out of people's lungs, and they didn't find any other type of carrier.
Can you talk about what these lungs look like when you look at them?
Yeah.
Got an X-ray?
Yeah, sure. They basically, well, and anytime, I wish I had an X-ray I could show you. We may be able to find one for you, I don't know. But basically what happens is that the X-ray starts to, your X-rays look black, air looks black when you X-ray it, and you start seeing white patches. And the more white you see, the more severe the lung disease it is. And so there's something that we call ARDS, which is adult respiratory distress syndrome, which basically the lungs look whited out. In the most severe case, what you see is just all white. And what that means is that there are no air pockets in there, which means that people can't get air into their lungs or can't get air into their bloodstream.
Now, when it comes to manufacturers, that they just claim people are using their product improperly, that they state clearly don't use this or don't put that in there, and these people are doing this on their own, so they're not liable for any of this?
Well, I can't speak to a lot of that question. I can tell you that there are big companies that make things that in the cartridges, those are very clear formulations.
Like
And
Juul is owned by R.J. Reynolds, I think.
right, right. And so they make this stuff, and I think the initial makers of Juul, I've heard them speak. I mean, they were shocked when this happened, so I don't think they saw it coming, but I don't think that relieves anybody of any responsibility. But there are then things that people make themselves, and there are a lot of smaller makers, and so along with the recommendation of only to use certain types of things is don't use things made by small companies if you can avoid it, if you have to do it, because those are the ones that are not very well controlled.
Is there anything the health district or the county is doing in direct response to this? Staff obviously is holding a press conference on calling people.
Right.
But are there any other actions you're taking because of this?
Not at this time.
What's the message to anybody who hears about this recent case, they themselves vape or know somebody who does vape? What signs and symptoms should they be looking out for to potentially catch this before it
Sure.
gets any worse? What should people know?
Sure, it would be exactly what you would think. It would be coughing, it would be shortness of breath, it would be difficulty breathing, and it doesn't necessarily have to happen slowly. Some of these cases have actually progressed rather rapidly, where over the course of several days to a week. Particularly if you're not just smoking a little bit, but if you're smoking a lot and you're starting to notice that you're not breathing as well as you should, it'd be a good time to stop and seek medical care.
How critical is it to catch this as early as possible?
It's extremely critical to catch it early as possible, because what happens is once it reaches a certain point, there's very little we can do about it.
As a parent of a school-age kid, I've seen it really prevalent for the past 2, maybe 3 years.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the developing lungs that parents should know, that maybe kids should know, because parents don't usually know what kids are doing?
Yeah, well, believe it or not, kids' lungs are very, very resilient. So that's the good news. So that if your kid has been vaping, and you can confiscate their vaping materials, and they don't have any problems, they're probably going to be okay. But the reality is that once the damage has been done, then there can be what we call fibrosis, basically scar tissue, and that's going to stay there. And so there can be permanent damage done to the lungs, even if it's only a little bit of permanent damage done to the lungs.
This kind of compared to when they tried to help by banning the Joe Camel cartoons and
Yeah.
things that are more appealing to the children.
Yeah, I think that's really the intent. You know, we face in public health, we face a real conundrum of things like this, because banning things outright just drives it underground, right? And so, we have this great conundrum of, we're trying to get people to stop smoking cigarettes, yet we're seeing a move around the country to legalize marijuana use, right? And so I think developing some good common sense regulations is a good start. I think this is a good start in terms of what the FDA is doing. I don't think this is the end of it.
Do you know if the cases in Galveston County, if any of those involve these more knockoff type of devices as opposed to, let's say, the Juul or the widely manufactured?
Right. I honestly don't know the answer to that.
Do you know if we'll ever know the answer to that?
Pardon?
Do you know if we'll ever know the answer to that?
We're probably not going to tell you.
Well, the CDC or?
The CDC does. The CDC actually has very extensive regulations. So the thing has evolved. So what I can tell you is this, is that nationwide, early on, it seemed like the greater offenders were the homemade drugs. And FDA, back I think in 2017, made regulations on what could go in, not so much in what you document what was going into those. So that put a lot of people out of business. But as time has developed, it's become clear that the cartridges have become very, very popular among teenagers, and they actually have gained a disproportionate amount of market share. So that's why that's the particular thing being targeted.
Is there a bigger issue here also that the unregulated development of and access to the marketplace without regulation? You've got a massive number of young people who are using vaping as a nicotine delivery device, and do we have a generation of nicotine addiction now that might not have happened without the advent of vaping, do you think?
Could be. It could be, and I think time will tell with that. One of the things that's changing with the regulations is that you have to be 21 to buy these devices. Now that, again, that, just as we know, same with cigarettes, that doesn't stop kids from smoking. But I think it will help, and we don't know the answer to that question, and time will tell.
Is there a way to get some video or some slides or some type of something to show what an actual lung that might be damaged or different?
There may be. We don't have them here. I could potentially contact some physicians and get something for you. There also may be some stuff that's already published, which I could try and get for you as well.
And did you visit this patient yourself?
I did not see this particular patient. Okay. Any other questions? No? All right. Thank you all very much.